Hello and welcome back here to the BIM Coordinator Summit. We're on stage 10. We have finished up our first round of talks. We're going to have a little bit of a Q&A session where we're going to see if the crowd has any questions for us. So I'll start with any questions. Don't be shy. We have a mic in the audience. Be sure to speak into the mic if you want to ask the question. Here's one over here.
Yeah, my main question is to you that work with this technology of reality capture, especially from Hexagon, and all of you professionals that probably are using laser scanners. As you see this technology that's been around like 20 years in the market, right? And it's only increasing as now we need more and more data, right? People are using laser scanners more. How do you see, or how is your company, Hexagon in general, the group, right? Enabling people to work with this data more efficiently, and where do you see the future for the workflows in terms of BIM?
So very good question. I don't have a real good crystal ball, but broadly we see everybody's on this trend, right? Digital twin, everybody wants to do point cloud. But the key thing is, like you described, is that workflow. What is actually that use case for capturing all this data? I can't remember the stats. We are taking like 2 gigabytes of data every second. And that's the amount of data that's being captured, but it's not being used, right? It's probably in an 80 gig hard disk sitting in somebody's desk, and nobody's really using that information. So where we see it is that we need to find the use cases to work with all the different stakeholders to say, where should we be using this? Is this in facility management, asset management? Where can we use this and how can we use this? So that's where we are doing all these discussions, right, with the different stakeholders to develop the use cases, and not just because it's a trending topic and we'll sell more scanners, but essentially it needs to have value. There needs to be value for everybody rather than just saying, oh, I've captured everything, here's the as-built, that's it. And that's where, unfortunately, we are, where everybody is just doing the motion and that's it. So I see that from Hexagon, what we are trying to do is really, A, to educate the market, but also build the use cases to be relevant to all stakeholders.
I don't have an answer to that question, but I have an addition for you. We saw a couple of the slides up here, not only about reality capture, but we talked about SLAM and the ability that we've seen a few of the devices around here. What do you think the future is for that technology as compared to regular terrestrial scanning?
It's hard to tell what the future is for any technology at the moment, but I suppose it kind of following on from the previous question, it's a matter of just getting the right information at the right time and trying to optimize what we're doing. In terms of the SLAM technology, like it's kind of the fundamental of what we're doing at the moment. But we've come a long way in the last 6 months, and I know there's more things to come later in the year with what we're doing. Like we're creating kind of photogrammetry point clouds from 360 cameras now, and that wasn't possible 12, 18 months ago. So it's kind of, from our end, we honestly have no idea where it's going to end. Unfortunately, I can't give you a better answer than that.
Yeah. So again, using our BLK to go, we call it the Grand Slam because we have the LiDAR SLAM, we've got the visual SLAMs. So again, that's where we believe this is an important technology. It's an important piece because rather than trying to navigate yourself to know where you are, right, these SLAM technologies can really help us with reality capture to simplify the processes. So I personally believe that we are investing more into this and to see how all these SLAM technologies can really be autonomous. Our Hexagon's tagline is empowering an autonomous sustainable future. We believe that all these are required for that sustainable future.
I had a question for you about the reality capture. Typically, there are process includes capturing the data, then cleaning and registering, and then finally creating the model. Where do you see integration of AI or ML tools that helps, expediting the process or probably removing some of the steps? What do you think? Which phase it can be done and where we are currently?
So again, all these auto registration, stitching, that's where, again, we don't call it AI. We just call it just another feature. But essentially it is, right? Because the traditional way of stitching two different point clouds or different areas has been a very tedious process. Look back 5-10 years ago when we first started, it was a very difficult process. So whether it really requires AI, again, it is a trending word, artificial intelligence. But really, what is artificial intelligence? I think in the earlier presentation, it's about training that model. You don't need to train a model to make registration easier. It is just different technologies and different algorithms that we can apply. So ultimately, AI is going to be in everything. It is just that now it's a tagline that you just add a sticky note, AI, then it becomes trendy.
Thanks. Question for Fraser, but I'm sure the rest of the panel might like to jump in on it. Having sat both sides of the fence, both client side and on the design and delivery side, I was just wondering, as well as the sort of geometric stuff that everyone's talking about, what actually happens about the reliability and particularly maintainability planning documentation and the analysis that really sits behind the documentation? Because quite often we spend an awful amount of time on that, and that is actually what I used to do. So I'm interested what happens to that information on your project, for example, because quite often, 10 years later, I've been working client side, and I've gone looking for my documentation, and I don't see it. And I don't actually see it actually turning up today with what we're actually receiving from the supply chain. So I just wondered, how much focus do we actually have on that associated information to support the operational maintenance phase? So not only just the maintenance, but obviously there's lots of things in things like power control. Certain scheme designs will give information that needs to go to traction control facilities, etc. Do we make sure that that information actually does get routed to them and then that they maintain it later? Thanks.
Yeah, good question. So, and that really, for me on this project, has been kind of my uppermost intention. So typically in the past, I sort of mentioned it during the talk, that health and safety files and all of that information that got handed over at the end of a project would either go into a folder, and then it sort of, that morphed into a CD, and then some people had it on the USB stick. But the problem with those formats is it becomes static information, and the access to that information, by static I mean not easily modified, and then the access to that information itself, not only to the ops and maintenance staff, but then to new projects. And so on the CVL project, I can't say this for every project, but on this project that I'm involved in, I was quite keen that the information stayed in cloud storage, that was accessible by all the people that needed to access it, but also that, like a lot of cloud storage, you'll have access and permissions on those files themselves. And I wanted it that you have a very simple, streamlined workflow of being able to revise those files where needed, or to even add files to those same folders. So we're living in this day and age now where the health and safety file is no longer this static folder, if you like, or even electronic folder, but it's more of it should become a live depository that can be amended or appended during the ops and maintenance phase, but also that can be distributed as a new data cut to any new projects in quite a streamlined way. But it's getting that right is very much about the detail of how you organize that information and how you apply the access and permissions. And so that's something I've strived to do on this project, but in some respects it will be time that will tell whether I've been successful in that. Does that answer the question?
Thanks. In part, I suppose really the sort of thing that I was thinking of is we'll have, say, a RAM report produced by a discipline specialist. Then we'll have the discipline specialists, be that track or MEP, traction, whatever. And there'll be lots of comments in a lot of reports that all have a bearing on operations and aspects of maintainability. But that information is spread over many documents because they haven't actually thought that in the future someone is going to have a question about that topic area, and we want to draw a thread all the way through those things, all that information that we know about it. Yeah. And I think quite often that's why in many industries we always seem to have meetings where everybody gets invited to the room, X years down the line, because everybody's got a little bit of the puzzle. We're trying to put it together and see what the picture is on the front of the box. And I actually always sort of took the view that what we was trying to do with BIM as a sort of information management process was to understand that picture to begin with and plan it so that scenario doesn't arise. I don't know what the answer is exactly, but I just got this feeling we're not really there yet.
Well, I'll try and comment on that if that's okay, or do you want to move on? No? So if I'm understanding you correctly, much of this is to do with the supply of construction assurance information. Certainly during the construction phase, unless you were talking about post-construction. Design, okay. Well, even design and construction. And if that information is not in the CDE, in our case project-wise, we will find that there are lots of stuff, particularly where it's testing and certificates, that would just naturally be on site and not in project-wise for whatever reason. And so I'll spend a lot of time briefing the construction teams of how to supply that information so that we can at least, once they've finished with it, bring it into project-wise. But you are right that at the end of the day, if it's not supplied and stored, and there isn't linkage between that information and a geographic area or an association with something, it's quite easy to lose. And that's why I mentioned about, in our case, breaking up the health and safety files into basically 65 across our entire route and then mapping that with a geographic area. So that when you say to people, supply your information and group it into, in our case, ELR and mileage, we can start to link it. I don't know whether that answers the question, but yeah. Fine.
Thank you. I'm sitting here as an asset manager, and I'm looking at a 5-year, because that's tied into budgets and planning processes with Department for Transport, but I'm looking at a 5, 10, 20-year planning cycle. I actually want to understand, how much is that going to cost me? Yep. What the implications on labour will be. If I'm thinking of another project coming along and taking something out and putting it in, what's that going to do to all of those other predictions? So that, if you like, they're my use cases. So it's not so much about, that information about a specific asset. It's actually information to allow us to make decisions about how we manage the portfolio of assets to deliver a business capability. Because at the end of the day, this is asset management. This is ISO 5500 series.
We're getting near the end, but I do have a question I'd like to end it on for you, Eric, and it kind of ties into what we have here. You talked about your presentation that you inherited the project. In 60 seconds or less. What happens when you inherited the pile of expletive that you inherited? How do you get around that?
Well, it's difficult, because, the project is already at a point where everything is seemingly in the right spot, right? So you can't start moving those data points around. So you have to live with it, essentially, unless you know that they're not lined up. You can remove the shared coordinates and reapply them, but that's still, you're doing stuff to the project location that could have downstream detriment to the project. So you have to hope everything's lined up and verified. It sucks, man.
So I guess what you're saying is that when you're handed something that's not quite right, the best thing you can take from it is a lesson learned and hope that you're not handing that over to the next person.
Something like this, yes. Yeah.
Awesome. And right on time, you're bringing us right into the end. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for coming for the first half today. We are just about to head off on break. And then we will come back for the second half at half an hour. So thank you very much, everyone.